Well, a very good evening to each and every one of you joining me, Ms. Belinda Scannell, here on today's episode of Your Manchester. We have got a very interesting show for you today. As always, a variety of different things to be covered. But today, of course, we'll be looking at World AIDS Day 2022, and we'll be joined in the studio by people from the LGBT Foundation and, of course, the George House Trust as well. Not enough for you. We're also going to be delving into the history of pantomime. We're going to be looking at a fantastic film and play that is out at the moment called The Mousetrap. It's all going on for you. This is how you show them. But first, we are, of course, literally only a few hours away from the 1st of December, believe it or not, which many of you will be thinking about Christmas. But for many of us, we're thinking about World AIDS Day 2022. And to discuss that further, we're joined in the studio today by you two. Introduce your full-on selves for us, please.
My name's Craig Langton from LGBT Foundation.
And
I'm Darren Knight from George House Trust.
Both fantastic charities and projects and companies. World AIDS Day, what does it mean for you two specifically?
It's a day to come together as communities and remember people that we've lost, and to also carry on the conversation. Hopefully it's not just for one day, but to end the stigma that's still out there.
What does it mean for you, Darren?
I think similar to Craig, really. George House Trust is a HIV charity. Everything we do is around HIV. World AIDS Day is tinged with sadness, that time of reflection, but that remembrance and that looking forward of hope, and really working together to tackle HIV stigma and ensure that we've really got a world where HIV holds no one back.
Yeah. Well, we think about that now, but I mean, going back to like the mid-80s, it was a different story altogether. People were getting AIDS, and it was a terrible time for people. What do you think people would have been feeling had this show been going out 20 years ago, 30 years ago even?
Well, I think for us, George House Trust, we were actually established in 1985 by 6 gay men responding to the issue of AIDS in Manchester. And at that time, the stigma was horrific, the fear, the shame, that homophobia, all of that actually created a hot pot, which meant we needed to do something really important, which born Manchester AIDS Line. And just this morning I was having a look in some of our old logbooks to kind of reflect on the calls that were coming at that time, and it was worry. People were just worried. They didn't know, they didn't have the facts. The media was just creating hype, sensationalism all the time. We've progressed so much, it's unreal, and now HIV is just a long-term health condition. It can be managed, and that's amazing progress.
You talk about the press there aiding this sort of stigma. I mean, there was that horrific advert for AIDS. I mean, I wasn't around back then, but I mean, I remember as a youngster thinking about perhaps maybe I was gay, maybe I wasn't. Was I destined to get AIDS? How do you think people would have reacted seeing that advert?
I think it's damaged a lot of people. It's like, for me, for example, like growing up as a gay kid, like thinking I was gay and then connecting the two dots, all sex seemed dangerous to me. And I think that's massively crawls into your adult life as well, because sex just seems dangerous. There's a lot of damage there.
So where did AIDS come from, I suppose, is a big question. How was it sort of never mentioned and then it was so like everywhere?
Well, I think, if we go right back to the beginning, so in 1981, there was a cluster of an unknown issue that affected 5 gay men in the States. And then we had our first AIDS death in the UK later that year in December 1981. But AIDS isn't a thing, it's a cluster of issues, really. It's a syndrome. HIV was the issue, but it didn't have a name for a number of years. It was initially called GRID, gay-related immune disease. And then kind of as things were developed, understood actually it was causing a range of infections, AIDS, and then obviously they identified the genomes and stuff to actually understand it's what we now call HIV, which is a virus.
But it wasn't just affecting gay people, was it? I mean, I know both of your foundations deal with HIV and AIDS as it was kind of back in the day, and it didn't just affect gay people, did it?
No, not at all. Anybody can get a virus. We know that from COVID. That's a really, really important thing. What we do know is that some people are more susceptible for different reasons. But any community can be impacted by HIV. And now we have, a massive decline in the number of new diagnoses amongst gay and bisexual men, or men who have sex with men. But particularly problematic is the continued issues in Black African communities, for example, and also the rising numbers in the heterosexual community more broadly.
It's we're going to touch on a lot of topics throughout today's episode, but we are for now just going to pause for a second because that's what we like to do, and we like to have both sides of the coin on this program. So we are now going to be looking at pantomime and the history of pantomime. Why not interrupt the chat with a little bit of history of pantomime with Mark Llewellyn?
Seems like a nice boy. The history of pantomime is quite a colourful one, and of course this is the start of the pantomime season. Oh yes, it is. The word pantomime, well, that goes back to Greek origins, and it means imitator of all. That's really what a pantomime is, isn't it? Now, one of the main origins is the touring theatres of Italy during the 13th and 14th centuries. These were called Commedia dell'arte tours. And the reason that they had to perform in mime was that in every region of Italy, they spoke in different dialects. So you couldn't go on with dialogue, you had to mime the story out. And they chose popular, known stories, a bit like pantomime ones. The characters are also familiar to us, the main character being Harlequin, and he would point to the diamonds, the different colours on his costume, so that we knew whether he would say green with envy, and so on, things we still do today. And these performers would appear on the village green, a bit like here. They would stay overnight, they would dig ditches to sleep in, that's why actors stay in digs. And at the end of the performance, someone would go around with a box and collect money. Hence, we book in the box office today. Now, the other thing that we get from that is Mr. Punch, who comes from one of the characters that they had. And also, Harlequin used to have a sort of wooden paddle, which he used to smack on his hand to make a noise when he did comedy. And that was known as the slapstick. Now, theatre then moved on. Pantomime, as it were, came to Britain, and it was developed even further. Come with me. So how did the Italian form of theatre get to Britain? Oh, sorry, couldn't resist. Well, after the execution of King Charles I and the restoration to the throne of King Charles II, the British royal family were, understandably I suppose, rather reluctant to allow people to speak directly to the audience. They might stir up trouble. So a system of licensing for theatres was brought in. If you had a licence, you were probably called the Theatre Royal or something like that. And these theatres were known as legitimate theatres. Illegitimate theatres were those without a licence who had to perform things like songs and comic monologues and so on. They couldn't actually talk directly to the audience lest they stir up trouble. Now, these theatres struggled for things to put on. And so when pantomime eventually worked its way across from Italy, well, they latched on it because not only was it able to be staged without a licence, but it was very popular as well. So it put bums on seats, as it were. Now, one of the big proponents of this form of art was a man called Joseph Grimaldi, who at the time was running the Sadler's Wells Theatre in London. He was a clown, and he now took on the stories of the Harlequinades of Commedia dell'arte. He also brought in comic songs where the audience knew the tagline, so they joined in. One of his most famous was about a woman selling what were called hot codlins, or toffee apples as we'd call them today, and she kept herself warm by swigging on a quart of gin, and the audience knew to shout out gin, and they would stamp their feet for him to do these songs. In fact, he is remembered today because he is buried in what's now called Joseph Grimaldi Park in North London, and there is a service every year for clowns at the church where he's buried. Also, if you visit his grave, you'll find that set into the ground are sort of steps which you can stand on, and it plays that famous song about the hot codlins. Also, in pantomime in particular, sometimes artists are asked to do just a little bit of business to cover maybe a scene change, and that is called doing a Joey Joey. Well, when he died, people thought that was the end of pantomime, but of course it wasn't. It developed, it was the imitator of all. And we move on to the Victorian period. Now, there was a famous comedian called Dan Leno. He actually came up from his native London to Manchester, lived in Hume for a while, married there, and he went to Oldham and he took part in the World Clog Dancing Championships, which he won. And on the back of that new fame, he went down to London again, and he was signed up as Dame at the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane. And he developed really the role of dame as we kind of know it more today, bun wig and so on. But also licensing came to an end under the reign of Queen Victoria, so they could now speak directly to the audience. He partnered up with people like Murray Lloyd, who brought in comic songs of the period, innuendo, which we know today, and also routines like the wallpapering routine, motoring, all that sort of stuff that again is in place in British pantos today. So it's always developed. People complain today, oh, it's got a Big Brother star in, there's too much innuendo, too many topical references. It has always taken all those things along the route. And today, well, yes, it's very British, but as you see, influence from around the world. You will find the odd panto in places like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, America, and so on. But really, it is very much a quintessentially British art form. Keeps, of course, many thousands of people in work each year. And for the majority of professional pantos, well, the money from the panto ticket sales, and estimated in this country to be around £280 million, that money keeps theatres going for the rest of the year. Oh, yes, it does. That's panto.
Well, how fascinating is that? The history of pantomime there for each and every one of you. Today, of course, we are focusing heavily on World AIDS Day 2022. And our guests are still with us now. Now, we discussed there, kind of where it was, kind of where we are. But I mean, how do people fully get diagnosed with this? How do they know that they're fully living with this condition?
Testing's super important, especially, there's different types of tests you can get now as well. You can get tests at a sexuality clinic, GPs, home testing kits, LGBT Foundation, for example. It's very quick as well. The window period for the test picking up HIV varies for tests, but you're looking at maximum window period being 90 days, and the test we use is 45 days. So.
And I think a lot of people instantly, with the word test, would be thinking, "Oh my goodness, what is it invasive?" I mean, what is a HIV test? What does it mean you have to do?
A finger prick.
Is that it?
Yeah, for sure. So we'd prick your finger, or you can prick your own finger at home as well if you're on a home testing kit. Send the samples off, and then you get the test results back.
And the results are ultra reliable. Because sometimes throughout COVID, we were doing these silly little tests, and sometimes you'd find you might have it, you might not have it. These are ultra reliable tests.
Yeah, for sure. It's a small blood sample, and it's called a dry blood spot test as well. So it's also testing for hepatitis and syphilis too.
Okay, because I mean, there is a lot of sexual related diseases that you can get. HIV, of course, being a major one. I mean, people should be being tested. How often would you say? If you're living a certain lifestyle, is it a lifestyle thing?
I'd say it depends, really. Like, it depends how much sex you're having, if you're having sex with multiple partners, if you don't know the HIV status of those partners as well. Try and build it into like a routine of maybe twice a year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's simple as that.
Yeah.
As simple as that. And Darren, people living with HIV, is it a life sentence? Are you doomed?
No, that's language from way back when, I think. So post mid-90s, when treatment became available, now anybody diagnosed with HIV can expect to live a normal life expectancy. It's a long-term health condition, just like diabetes or something else. Just take your medication, and then we've got amazing progress with stuff like U equals U, so undetectable equals untransmittable.
What does that mean? Break that down for us.
It basically means that if you're on effective medication and you've got an undetectable amount of HIV in your body, you can't pass HIV on through sex, so you don't even need to wear condoms. You can't pass it on. It's been scientifically proven. There's been loads of studies, and that's amazing progress. And it just goes to show the power and the amazingness of the medications that are available today.
So, going back to the 80s there, where, if you thought you had HIV or if you thought you had AIDS, it was basically a life sentence. You're saying that it isn't that anymore? Absolutely not.
No, you can live a normal life. You can do anything. You can join the army with HIV. Absolutely nothing to hold you back.
It's we've moved on so much, haven't we?
Absolutely.
And perhaps we'll look at that in a few minutes' time. But let us fully now focus on some amazing little VTs to give you an idea of what you can fully indulge in here this week over in Manchester.
Hello, my name is Rebecca McCauley, and I am here in the gorgeous 53-2 in Manchester. In just 2 weeks' time, we're going to be performing Realms of Glory here, and it's a festive musical about two couples in the Manchester Blitz in the 1940s. Tickets available on Eventbrite now, so come and see us.
Hi, I'm Hayley, and if you aren't yet into the Christmas spirit, fear not. There is a film hitting the cinema in the UK, and it is called A Hollywood Christmas. It sounds absolutely brilliant, cosy, romantic, with lots of light-hearted elements too. Perfect, I think. It is about a film director. She makes lots of Christmas films, and she ends up living one of her Christmas films. And during production, an exec turns up and he threatens to halt everything. Now, it stars Jessica Vann of the comedy Awkward and the film Battlefield, and also Josh Swickard, and I think he was in General Hospital, and also the 2020 film A California Christmas, which I also loved. So that is out in a few days' time. Enjoy.
Hello, Stephen here for Your Manchester, and I'm just back from Manchester Opera House, having been to see Agatha Christie's The Mousetrap. The Mousetrap is a classic whodunit murder mystery which follows a group of 7 strangers who find themselves snowed in at a remote countryside guesthouse. When a police sergeant arrives following news of a murder in London, the guests discover, to their horror, that a killer is in their midst. One by one, the suspicious characters reveal their sordid pasts. This 70th anniversary tour starting in Nottingham, where the play received its premiere back in 1952, and it will visit all the original cities it visited 70 years ago. Still running in the West End, The Mousetrap is now the world's longest running play and has plans to open on Broadway next year. The play is a real thriller and full of suspense, and it has everything you'd hope for from a murder mystery, including an unexpected plot twist. The show has a small but very talented cast. The rather flamboyant character of Christopher Wren, played brilliantly by West End alumni Elliot Clay, brings some much-needed comic relief to 2 hours of unrelenting tension. Fans of Only Fools and Horses will instantly recognise Gwyneth Strong, who plays the rather frosty Mrs. Boyle, whilst EastEnders star John Altman plays the unexpected guest, Mr. Paragon Sr. Who is the murderer? Who will be their next victim? Can you solve this world-famous mystery? If you can, remember to keep the secret to yourself. Agatha Christie's The Mousetrap 70th Anniversary Tour is on at Manchester Opera House now until the 3rd of December.
So there we are then, loads going on for you and loads to watch on the stage and of course on the screen as well. Still in studio with us, we have you from the LGBT Foundation and you from the George House Trust. Now obviously World AIDS Day, we celebrate it every year. What are you guys bringing for us this year?
Yeah, for sure. So tomorrow, from a testing side, we're going to be down at JY. So you can get a full screening, you can get a rapid HIV test as well. And for people who aren't currently taking PrEP, the Northern will be being able to prescribe PrEP to people as well.
What is that?
Yeah, PrEP is pre-exposure prophylaxis. So it's a pill that you can take either every day, or you can take it if you're preparing to have sex as well. And what it will do is, as long as I PrEP in my system, it will prevent HIV. So, for example, if I was going to take it every single day, I just take that every 24 hours. Or say if I wanted to hook up later, I could take it I could take 2 tablets 2.5 hours before hooking up, and then 24 hours after that, 24 hours after that. And yeah, it massively reduces the chance of HIV transmission.
But of course, you would recommend at all times safe sex.
I mean, like, there's different tools out there. Do you know what I mean? Like Darren was talking about before, U equals U. Like that is like a condom as well. Do you know what I mean? When you think about it, like U equals U, PrEP, condoms, talking with partners, all of these can bring us closer and end the stigma, hopefully, in our lifetime.
That's fantastic. You mentioned the stigma. World AIDS Day. What is George House Trust doing for this?
So, along with our partners at LGBT Foundation and BHA for Equality, we'll be all over Manchester. So I think we're in 10 different venues tomorrow, giving out red ribbons information. So that's really, really positive. And then the really important bit is the World AIDS Day Vigil, which will be in Sackville Gardens at 6 p.m. on the 1st of December. And that will include a range of different people talking about HIV, what the impact of it is now, this year's campaign focus around Equalise, and also an opportunity to remember, reflect, and look forward with hope.
So you mentioned there Equalise. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's just about making sure that everybody has equal access. So that worldwide theme is making sure that there's equal access, treated equally, all of that focus, it's actually equalised across the board for everybody living with HIV.
It's phenomenal. Do you think we'll ever get to a stage where we won't need these vigils, or indeed, unfortunately, do you think it'll ever get to a stage where we don't need these two organisations?
I think for me, I long for a day where George House Trust is able to shut the door because we've got a cure and there's no more issues around HIV. It's a long way in the future yet, but that's what we're working towards. We don't want to be around. A charity's job is to put itself out of business, and that's what we're focused on. But we've got a bit of a journey till we get there.
Yeah.
Strong words from both of you there. Thank you so much for joining us today. Absolute pleasure. So make sure you are all at Sackville Gardens.
Sackville Gardens, 6 p.m.
6 p.m. for that fantastic vigil. And I've just realised that you didn't see it because my jacket was covering, but I have had my ribbon on, everybody. I have had my ribbon. And I am going to get myself tested straight after the programme. On Sunday's show, we are going to be looking at the outtakes of 2022, which is interesting. And we'll see how we get on there. Till then, though, thanks for everybody for watching this week's episode of Your Manchester.